What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video, I'll be teaching you what every ability does in Destiny 2. If you've watched my subclass school videos, then you already know this information, but if not, then this will be the perfect primer to get you ready for build crafting with Prismatic when the final shape releases. Prismatic is essentially a combination of a bunch of abilities from our current subclasses, so having in-depth knowledge of how they all work will be crucial to build crafting with Prismatic when we get our hands on it. We have a lot to go over, so let's jump right into it. We'll just go with the subclasses in alphabetical order, starting with Arc and finishing with Void. We'll be looking at the Arc abilities. This includes melees, grenades, supers, and even a jump that is specific to Arc Hunter and a class ability that is specific to Arc Titan. So let's get those out of the way first. The special Arc Hunter jump is Blink. It states, jump while airborne to teleport a short distance. I couldn't find any compendium info, but there isn't too much to know. It is just another movement tool that allows you to traverse. But this one has a bit of a skill gap and takes some getting used to. Next is the Titan Thruster class ability. It states, while grounded, quickly evade in a lateral direction. This is good in PvP for avoiding enemy attacks, but it's also wonderful for a Heart of Inmost Light ability spam build in PvE. Traditional barricades have a long cast animation, but this one can be activated extremely fluently while in combat, making it very easy to use and get back to dealing damage. I absolutely love it with my Hoyle Arc Titan. I made a video on this build and it is truly one of the best in the game, so check it out after this video. Now we will get to the more traditional abilities. We'll start with the melees. Hunter and Warlock have 2 and Titan has 3. So starting with Hunter, we have Combination Blow, which reads, a quick strike that temporarily increases your melee damage when defeating a target, stacking 3 times. Defeating targets with this ability also refills your class ability energy and restores a small amount of health. So this is an awesome melee ability. You can have a super strong gameplay loop when pairing this with Gambler's Dodge, as you can dodge to get your melee and then get a melee kill to get your dodge back. So you can just keep looping it over and over again. And you have 20 seconds to get a kill to keep stacking Combination Blow times 3. One thing to be aware of though is that if you are running Lethal Current, your melee will also apply Jolt. This is a good thing as it gives this gameplay loop tremendous ad clear, but it can also mean the Jolt will get the final blow instead of the melee damage. So you may get a melee kill, but not keep Combination Blow going. So just be aware of this. If you don't get your dodge back from a melee kill, this is why. If this happens, just simply quickly try and melee another enemy and you can usually keep the loop going easily enough. I tested this in PvP too, and even at Combination Blow times 3, it isn't quite enough to fully kill a Guardian. It only goes up by 23% per stack for PvP. So maybe at super low resilience it would kill, but we tested at 5 resil and my buddy TJ still survived. In PvE, each stack goes up by 60%. So at base I hit for around 10,000 damage, and then 16,394, 26,230, and 41,967. And this can stack with things like a 1-2 punch shotgun and even Spark of Feedback and Liar's Handshake. With that combo, I was able to punch for 246,765 damage, and a base melee is 10,246, so this is about 24 times more damage. Truly incredible stuff. So it just goes to show how strong this melee can be in the right build. Next we have Disorienting Blow. Striking a target with this melee ability blinds them and amplifies you. So it's pretty straightforward. It blinds enemies and makes you amplified. Not much more to say. It has some good utility in high-end content because blind is such a powerful verb. And one thing to note is if you run this with Tempest Strike, it seems as though the blind doesn't apply from the Tempest melee hit. Just something to be aware of. Next we have the Titan melees. First is Ballistic Slam, which states, after sprinting and while airborne, activate your charged melee ability to slam to the ground, dealing damage to nearby targets. So I didn't realize this until I made the video, but the compendium says it gives 3% super energy per enemy hit. So I decided to equip Insurmountable Skull for it and load up a Shuro Chi checkpoint for myself, and holy crap. Even without hands-on on the helmet and heavy-handed on the gloves, I was able to almost get 2 full supers in about 40 seconds. So this is really good for getting a quick super. And this is why I like doing videos like this. I used to run this setup way back in the day before Arc 3.0, but now I may have to dust it off again because wow, this shit is strong. Obviously this is meant for lower end content because slamming into a crowd of enemies in a GM will likely get you killed, and this melee itself doesn't do a ton of damage, so it won't obliterate the ads like you're seeing here. But in lower end content, this melee can do some serious work. I even did another run where I put on one hands-on mod and two heavy-handed mods, so I was making orbs and getting extra super energy from hands-on, and I easily got 2 supers in Shuro Chi. Next up is Seismic Strike. After sprinting for a short time, activate your charged melee ability to slam shoulder first into your target, damaging and blinding targets in an area around them. While you are amplified, the blind radius is increased. So the compendium doesn't have concrete info on the blind radius because it is very tough to measure, but it can blind targets, and I have spoken at length in other videos how strong blind is. And because it can blind, that means it can obviously stun unstoppable champions. And you can use the melee ability as a movement tool as well, but it will use up 15% of your melee energy so that you can't spam it over and over. And lastly, we have Thunderclap. It's such a cool melee ability. It states, hold while grounded to plant your feet and begin charging your fist with arc energy. Release to unleash a devastating blast in front of you, dealing damage that increases with longer charge time. The compendium states it deals damage in a 7.5 meter cone up to 16 meters away, and it deals up to 80% more damage if you charge it for the full 2-second duration. This can get one-hit kills in PvP too, which is pretty cool. Overall, it's a really fun melee to use, and it can be super effective in the right build. Now we move on to the Warlock melees. We start with Ball Lightning, which states, fire an arc projectile forward that releases a perpendicular lightning strike after a short time. While amplified, Ball Lightning releases additional lightning strikes before detonating. So this ball travels up to 35 meters and it will detonate overhead if it has an enemy below it. This is also great for tagging players behind barricades in PvP. And if you are amplified, the lightning it shoots will explode 3 times instead of just once. Chain Lightning states an extended range melee that jolts your target and chains lightning to nearby targets. While amplified, it creates an additional set of chains. So when you're amplified, then it will create 2 sets of chains, doubling the maximum number of enemies that you can hit. And it also jolts targets. The jolt will not immediately stun an overload, however, but it will jolt it so that the follow-up damage will trigger the jolt and stun it. Now we move on to the grenades, which are common to all the classes. First up, we have Arc Bolt grenades. This states a grenade that chains bolts of lightning to nearby targets. So it can hit enemies within an 8 meter radius, and it can chain up to 3 times. This grenade doesn't hit particularly hard, but it is nice for hitting players behind cover in PvP. Next is the Flashbang grenade, an explosive grenade that damages and blinds nearby targets. Again, a grenade that doesn't hit very hard, but it has awesome utility because it can blind enemies. And it has a short base cooldown as well. The compendium tells us it can blind enemies in an 8 meter radius. Next is the Flux grenade. This grenade does hit hard, and it can even one-shot in PvP. It states an explosive grenade that attaches to targets. It is a high damage grenade that is used for single target damage over ad clear. Next up is the Lightning grenade, a grenade that sticks to any surface and emits a bolt of lightning. I absolutely love these grenades in PvP. I've gotten so many cheeky kills with them on Guardians behind cover. I wish I saved more clips because I've done some nasty things with these grenades. I never use them in PvE, as unless there are walls around, then they aren't really that great or easy to use. They stick to walls and emit a lightning bolt every couple seconds. But like I said, they're awesome in PvP. Next is the Pulse grenade, a grenade that periodically damages targets with its explosion radius. It detonates on impact and then releases 6 pulses that damage over 4 seconds. These grenades hit pretty hard in PvE, and they're my go-to for most PvE content. Skip grenades are next, a grenade that splits upon impact, creating multiple projectiles that seek targets. So these seek out enemies, and they're nice in PvE for staying behind cover and still tagging enemies. Or in PvP for chasing enemies down. They got nerfed a long time ago in PvP though, so they're not as good as they used to be. And lastly is the Storm grenade, a grenade that calls down a focused lightning storm. It deals damage twice in a large radius. These are pretty decent if you're accurate, and they're nice for bunched up groups of ads. They used to be broken on Touch of Thunder Archtitans, but they've since been reined in, and now pulse grenades are better for PvE in my opinion. So now we move to the supers. First up is the Arc Staff on Hunter. Form a staff of pure arc energy and acrobatically take out your foes. Hold to deflect incoming projectiles with your Arc Staff. So this is actually a really good ad clear super. The problem is the Arc Kit itself is great for ad clear, so it's not totally needed. You can see the compendium has lots of info on how everything works, but the big thing I want to talk about is knowing how to deal the most damage. You do a light attack, then a heavy attack. This will perform a palm strike that deals a ton of damage. It's excellent. And if you run Lethal Current, then your light attack deals more damage after you dodge. There are lots of intricacies with this super. You can also block incoming damage by twirling your arc staff. Like I said, this is a good super, it just isn't needed so much in today's sandbox, but it's a lot of fun. The go-to super now on Arc Hunter is usually Gathering Storm. Hurl your arc staff forward, embedding it into surfaces or large targets and jolting nearby targets. After a short time, a devastating lightning bolt strikes the staff, overcharging it with arc energy. While overcharged, your staff discharges lightning at nearby foes. So because our base kits and weapons are so strong now, Gathering Storm has become the better super because it is a one and done. So it's better for boss damage because you can throw it and then deal damage with your weapons. And it's better for high-end content because you can launch it from a distance and stay back, rather than getting into the fray like you do with Arc Staff. And once you chuck it, again, you can go back to dealing damage with your weapons and abilities on the other adds. Another thing I want to mention is if multiple players are using this for boss damage, make sure your teammates stagger their throws, as for some reason, the damage won't count for the subsequent Gathering Storms if one is already applied to a boss. Who knows, maybe this will get fixed one day, but for now, just trust me. Onto the Titan supers, we again have a roaming super and a one-off super. The roaming super is Fists of Havoc, and it states, supercharge your fists and slam the ground with the force of a maelstrom. While active, quickly charge forward, dealing damage to any impacted targets. Slam your fist to the ground, dealing damage in an area around you and leaving aftershocks in your wake. Performing a slam from the air deals additional damage. I tested this pretty extensively, and I couldn't really see the bigger damage numbers from jumping from a higher point. The compendium says it is the aftershocks that deal the damage, and this is very hard to test as the initial enemies die to the slam, or someone like Carl just moves out of the aftershocks. So we'll just have to take Bungie's word on it. But for how annoying it is to get, you are better off just using the super normally. And if you do create more damaging aftershocks because you naturally leapt from a higher point, then great. Once again, this super suffers as a result of the current sandbox. With the strength of Strand roaming supers being what they are, I feel like this super is in for a big buff in the final shape. The next super is Thunder Crash. Hurtle through the air like a missile and crash into targets to inflict meteoric damage. So if you fly close by enemies, you will kill them as you travel. Same with PvP players, but if you collide with them, then it will detonate the super. This super is much easier to navigate on mouse and keyboard, and you can use it as a movement tool as well to save yourself in a jumping puzzle or clear gaps. It does decent single target damage, but if you're in activities where you don't have locked loadouts, then you definitely want to swap to Kyrus of the Falling Star as it makes it deal double damage, which is super helpful. Again, this is the go-to super on Titan now because it is a one and done and good for dealing big chunk damage on high health targets like champions in a hurry. Now we have the Warlock supers, and much like the last two, we kinda have a winner and a loser. The first is Chaos Reach. Unleash a long-range channeled beam of concentrated arc energy. Press super while active to deactivate your super early, saving super energy. So being able to retain super energy is very beneficial. You can save up to 30% of it at most, and it is a Kamehameha and looks cool as hell. Honestly, one of the most fun supers in the game to use. And again, it's definitely easier to control on M&K, and it can be cast from a safe distance, so it's nice and high in PvE. Overall, just a really cool and fun super. And the Geomag stabilizers, much like Kyrus, make this super deal damage for a much longer duration, making it a very strong option with those exotic boots equipped. Then we have the last super, Storm Trance, an ad clear super. And we certainly know by now why these aren't the best in the current D2 landscape. It has a blink that you can do to chase down targets quicker, which is really nice in PvP. It is actually just a great super in general in PvP, but it does have a very long cooldown. A cool thing with this super is as you deal damage over time, the damage of it ramps up, so it can actually be good for ad clear and single target damage. When you cast it, there is a landfall which travels in many directions, dealing damage to anything it hits, and it is a good chunk of damage. On Carl, it hits for almost 80,000 damage when I cast the super, and it also applies Jolt. Then the light attack deals 6501 damage initially, and ramps up to 9670, so almost a 50% increase. This super is honestly no slouch, and its damage can be buffed by Stormdancer's Brace, and its duration can be buffed with the Crown of Tempests. So that makes this already pretty good super very strong. But again, it's an ad clear super and a one and done meta. Regardless, it is still very good and very fun to use. So next up, we have Solar. I mentioned class-specific abilities, and there are two on Solar. The first is a Hunter's Acrobat's Dodge. It has a base cooldown of 82 seconds, which is quite a bit longer than the traditional dodges, and it makes you and nearby allies radiant for 10 seconds. It also deals a little bit of damage to enemies if you land near them. This is really nice for getting radiant on demand. And then we have the Warlock's Phoenix Dive. This has a base cooldown of 55 seconds, which is actually quicker than Healing Rift and Empowering Rift. It will give you and allies within 9 meters of you Cure times 2. It also deals Scorch and provides Restoration if you cast it with Heat Rises active. What is nice about this is it can heal you in a pinch and has a quicker cast animation than Healing Rift. I found it super helpful in the contest mode for Crota's End. So next we will look at melee abilities. We will start with Hunter, who has the most with 4. The first is Knife Trick. These knives have the lowest base cooldown and apply 20 Scorch at base per knife and 30 with Ember of Torches, and it throws a fan of 3 blades, so you could apply as much as 90 Scorch with 1 melee. The lightweight knife will give you Radiant for 10 seconds if you land a precision hit. This and the Acrobat's Dodge can be made to last longer with Ember of Solace, but I cover how that works in the Fragment subclass school, so I won't be showing examples of these with and without Solace. This is more to show you what these abilities do at a base level. The Proximity Knife will stick to surfaces and either explode on impact or when enemies are in close proximity. You can also shoot it to explode it and it will deal some self-damage. This can be really good in PvP as the knife sticks to surfaces for up to 14 seconds. And finally, we have the Weighted Throwing Knife. This deals extra precision damage and will recharge our class ability if we get a precision final blow with it. Additionally, it will cause scorched targets to ignite. So if you made an enemy scorched with something like Skyburner's Oath, which is really easy to do, then you can cause an ignition, and you don't even need to get a kill. You just have to land the knife on a scorched enemy. So next we have the Titan. Ember Strike is a shoulder charge that applies 40 Scorch at base and 60 with Ember of Ashes, and it ignites enemies on kill. And if you don't land your melee, it takes away 15% of your melee charge. This was implemented as a way of stopping PvP players from constantly spamming it as a movement tool. And then we have Throwing Hammer, aka the Bonk Hammer. If you throw your hammer, you have 10 seconds to pick it up, and upon picking it up, you have a 1.4 second cooldown and then you can throw it again. This cooldown was added as a way to prevent hammer spamming on bosses with things like Synthecept's Titan. This was actually more effective than most heavy weapons in its day, and it didn't even use any ammo. It also grants Cure times 1 when you pick it up after hitting an enemy with it, so it is good at helping to keep you alive. You can also throw your hammer at a teammate to give them their hammer charge back, which is a pretty cool interaction. And now we have the Warlock. Celestial Fire is a tracking melee that shoots 3 firebolts that inflict 10 Scorch per bolt at base and 15 with Ember of Ashes, so 30 to 45 Scorch total. And the Incinerator Snap is a melee that shoots 5 sparks that explode and inflict 20 Scorch per spark or 30 with Ember of Ashes, meaning it can apply 100 to 150 Scorch per melee. But the melee spreads out at a distance, so if you want to cause an ignition, you have to use it up close. So next, let's look at grenades, which are common to all the classes. Touch of Flame on Warlock can enhance some of these, but I covered that in the Aspect video, so let's just look at how they work at base. The Firebolt grenade has the lowest base cooldown. This grenade sends Seekers out that can seek up to 4 enemies in an 8.5 meter radius. It deals 20 Scorch at base and 30 with Ember of Ashes. The Fusion grenade sticks to enemies on impact and then explodes. It deals 40 Scorch at base and 60 with Ashes. The Healing grenade grants Cure times 1 and Restoration times 1 for 4 seconds. The Incendiary grenade deals 60 Scorch at base and 90 with Ember of Ashes, and it deals more damage the closer it explodes to a target. The Solar grenade is a damage over time grenade. It applies 10 or 21 Scorch on detonation and then 9 or 14 Scorch every second the enemy is being hit by it. Swarm grenades release 9 seeking drones on impact that cause 5 or 8 Scorch per drone. These can be annoying in PvP and good for locking down a lane or cleaning up an enemy behind cover. The Thermite grenade creates 4 waves after landing and deals 10 or 20 Scorch per wave hit. This is really good on big targets like walkers, as the wave can deal numerous damage instances thanks to its size. The Tripmine grenades stick to surfaces, then explode when an enemy is near. They deal 40 or 60 Scorch. This pairs nicely with Proximity Knife on a hunter for creating a trap for an enemy to walk into. The wombo combo of both explosives going off at once can kill a guardian in PvP. So now we have supers. First up is Blade Barrage. It releases 2 fans of blades with 7 homing knives each, for 14 total, and this can be 20 total knives if we use the knock 'em down aspect. This is a good ad clear one and done super, but it can also be really good for single target damage, especially with Star Eater scales. Deadshot is a multi-shot golden gun, which is good for ad clear and can return bullets to the magazine as you proc ignitions. It also can cause lots of ignitions if you're using Ember of Combustion. Unfortunately, it doesn't last very long at all, and like the Precision Golden Gun, its damage is affected by Radiant, so make sure you are Radiant when you pop it. Marksman Golden Gun is a Precision Goldie. It lasts longer when you have Knock 'em Down equipped. It has a 2x precision damage multiplier, and it will ramp up damage the more crits you land, and makes 2 orbs of power for every crit you hit. Celestial Nighthawk also turns this into a single, super high powered shot. Next we have the Titan Supers. These can be enhanced by Roaring Flames and Syntheseps, but we'll be looking at their base forms. First is Burning Maul. The base duration of this alone is 25 seconds, and it can last up to 42 seconds if you stand in a sunspot. However, you use energy when you attack. The light attack drains 4% of your super energy, and the more hits you land, you get granted bonus attack speed, and scoring 10 hits will spawn a Cyclone which deals damage. The heavy attack drains 8% super energy and also creates a Cyclone. The Cyclone applies 3 to 5 Scorch every 0.56 seconds. Next we have Throwing Hammers, and this one is kind of complex. The compendium says it lasts 21 seconds at base, but if you have the Soul Invictus aspect equipped, then it will actually only be 16 seconds. However, we can extend its duration with Sunspots from Soul Invictus. The hammer throw drains 12% super energy for each throw, and there is a 1.5 second delay between throws, and the hammers release shrapnel which deal AoE damage. With Soul Invictus, the light attack only drains 9% of the super energy. There's a lot going on, and you can see the info posted on the screen, so pause if you want to read the finer details. The fine folks at the Destiny Data Compendium also pointed out that the Phoenix Cradle and Lorelei Splendor exotics can make this super even better. Again, you can read all the nuances on screen now if you're interested in every little thing. Truth be told, it's pretty good stuff to know, and this video is more just to provide you with the information. The moral of the story though is this: if you have Soul Invictus, make sure you stand in sunspots to get the most out of your super. It will make a huge difference. You can cast it while on the ground to make an initial sunspot, and then as you kill enemies, they will make even more sunspots. So move to these and throw from these sunspots to extend your super to be as long as possible. And now we have the Warlock supers. First up is Daybreak. It lasts 24 seconds at base and uses 6.5% energy per swing and 4.2% for each Icarus Dash proc. And you can Icarus Dash super frequently in this super. Also, if you have Phoenix Dive, you can dive and burn enemies, and if you have Heat Rises active, you can scorch them for 60 to 90 scorch, depending on if you have Ember of Ashes on or not. In the past, on Bottom Tree Dawnblade, you could get super energy back for kills with your Daybreak projectiles. That would be nice to have back to make the super slightly more viable, but it is still a decent super, especially with Dawn Chorus. And that brings us to Well of Radiance. The reason it would be nice to give that buff to Dawnblade is because Well of Radiance has been such an OP super for so long. Casting the Sword of the Well applies 40 to 60 Scorch, and this is really good to know as it can actually proc Revitalizing Blast this season. The radius of protection for the well is 6.5 meters, and the well can be destroyed by enemies, and the damage they deal is on screen now. The long and short of it is your well strength is tied to your resilience stat. This used to matter on bosses like Templar on Day 1 Vault of Glass, but this was before the Rezil changes. Most people now run 100 Rezil all the time, so this is not too much of an issue. Inside the well, you get a 25% damage bonus, but it's important to note that this does not provide Radiant. I go over this in more detail in my subclass School on the Solar Verbs, but just know that if you pop a golden gun in a well, you won't get the benefit of being Radiant. The well also converts the caster's damage to super damage. This has some unique interactions in the game, one of them being that solar weapons will work with Ember of Combustion in a well, so long as you're the one that casts the well. So it's important to know this information for certain scenarios. You also cannot be frozen when you're in a Well of Radiance, in PvE or PvP. On screen is all the detailed information of everything you need to know about Well of Radiance, and a link to the Destiny Data Compendium, as always, is in the description of this video. Next, we have Stasis. There really is not a lot to cover with Stasis abilities. Each class only has one super and one melee ability, and then there are only 3 grenades total. So let's jump right into it and cover supers first. Starting with Hunter. Their stasis is called Silence and Squall. The in-game description reads, summon 2 stasis Kamaz, Silence and Squall that you throw one after another. Silence creates a flash freeze blast that freezes and damages targets. Squall creates a stasis storm that slows and damages targets caught inside. So this is pretty straightforward. It doesn't do great single target damage, but it's pretty nice for ad clear. The stasis storm it conjures lasts for 14 seconds or 16 seconds with Whisper of Durance, and it applies a lot of slow and can freeze big groups of ads. And it also deals 300% increased damage against non-boss frozen enemies. So yeah, it's pretty good for group ad clear. Next up is the Titan Super Glacial Quake. This says, slam your gauntlet down to create a shockwave that freezes targets and sends out stasis crystals to freeze additional ones. Supercharge your Shiver Strike for bonus damage. Sprint through stasis crystals or frozen targets to shatter them instantly. The sprinting through crystals to shatter them is actually really nice. The super's light attack punch is absolute ass in PvP. I find that it has horrible hit registration and it's just unwieldy to use. But in PvE, the crystal formations you can make are crazy and they deal a ton of damage. People have soloed raid bosses with this super. It's not a quick one-off super though, but on bosses with big hitboxes, it just decimates them. It also has really good ad clear capability. It's a very cool super because there is a bit of a skill gap to its use. This super lasts a long time and you use super energy if you use the light or heavy attack. The Destiny Data Compendium info is on screen now if you want the exact details on how it works. Next is Winter's Wrath for the Warlock. This super states that you cast out a barrage of stasis shards that freeze targets. Cast out a shockwave that shatters all frozen targets. This too is more of an ad clear super than a high single target damage super. The compendium gives more detailed info if you're curious. I do want to point out one neat interaction though. If you are running the aspect Ice Flare bolts, then when you shatter the freeze, it will often cause an Ice Flare bolt to refreeze the enemy, and you can use the shockwave to deal damage to it again. This is a great way to conserve your super energy with this super, as the detonation doesn't use super energy, only the light attack that casts out the freezing bolts. And you definitely want to take advantage of this interaction if you can, because this super definitely needs a buff in my opinion. Yes, the Balador's Wrathweavers exist to buff this super's damage, but it feels pretty weak at base and higher end content. So hopefully it gets a damage buff in the future, because the neutral game on Shadebinder is pretty damn good. So that is it for the supers. Next we'll look at the grenades, which are common to all the classes. So first up we have the Cold Snap Grenade. It says a grenade that freezes on impact and sends another seeker to find and freeze targets. This can freeze up to 3 targets as it seeks out different combatants after it freezes them. And these can be enhanced with the Osmiomancy Gloves on Warlock or on the Touch of Winter aspect on Hunter. Next we have the Duskfield Grenade. This says a grenade that shatters on impact, leaving behind a field that slows targets and freezes those who do not leave the volume. The compendium gives us some additional info if you're interested. It lasts for 7 seconds at base and 9 seconds with Whisper of Durance. And on Hunter, you can make this grenade bigger with the Aspect Touch of Winter or the Exotic Gloves Renewal Grasps. And if you combine them, you can make an extra large Duskfield. This grenade also has a quite short 1 minute 31 second base cooldown, so if you spec into Discipline, you can get these grenades quite quickly. And finally, we have the Glacier Grenade. It states a grenade that creates a wall out of stasis crystals to block damage and freeze targets. These walls can be shattered for damage. The compendium gives us a bit more info on just how they form, and just like the other grenades, they can be enhanced by Touch of Winter. These grenades are great for shatter-based builds, and can work like a pseudo-Titan barricade to protect you from enemies. And while the other 2 grenades can freeze in PvP, this grenade cannot, it only applies slow. So that's it for the grenades. Let's now look at the melee abilities, of which there are only 1 for each class. Starting with Hunter, we have the Withering Blade. It states, toss a stasis shuriken at targets to damage and slow them. These ricochet off enemies so they can be decent for low tier ad clear, and they also apply slow when you get a hit. 60 in PvE and 40 in PvP. And we also get 2 melee charges, which is nice. On the Titan, we have Shiver Strike, probably the worst melee in the entire game. It states hold input to leap through the air. Releasing unleashes a powerful dash attack that knocks targets back and damages them. I would argue that this melee is not powerful at all. It does apply 50 stacks of slow if you can manage to get it to land on an enemy because the hit detection on it is laughably bad. It is nice as a movement tool though in certain situations to avoid enemy attacks, kind of like an Icarus Dash or a Frenzied Blade melee. And truly, that is all this melee is good for. And lastly, we have the Penumbral Blast melee on Warlock. This states, raise your stasis staff against your foe. Send a blast of stasis forward to freeze your targets. So this melee can instantly freeze an enemy, which can be very useful in certain situations and very strong in PvP if you're accurate with it. And that is it for the stasis abilities. Clearly stasis could use some love. They have a distinct lack of grenades and melees and supers to choose from, as does Strand. So maybe this is just how the darkness subclasses are supposed to be. But here's hoping that stasis gets some love in the final shape. Next up is Strand. Much like the other darkness subclass in Stasis, there are very few abilities on Strand. Each class only has one melee ability, one super, and 3 grenades. But I still want to cover them so you can know exactly what they do. We'll start with the grenades, which are common to all the classes. We'll start with the grapple grenade. Weave a grappling hook and quickly pull yourself forward. Grappling to a tangle immediately recharges your grenade energy. During and shortly after grappling, your melee attack deals area damage and unravels targets. So let's take a look at that, because there are a few things going on with the grapple. First, it can be used to do some really fun movement tech, but you can't keep grappling over and over to get around. But you can grapple over and over to a tangle or a grapple tangle. And then the way the grapple grenade does damage is it's actually from doing the melee after grappling. And let me tell you, this melee can be abused to do some insane damage. It is the meta for many different types of speedruns. From GM clears to solo dungeons, the damage a grapple melee does is crazy if you build into it properly, particularly with Banner of War and Wormgod's Caress, but it's also great with Syntheseps. There is essentially no cooldown on your grapple grenade as long as you keep grappling to a grapple tangle or a regular tangle, and you can abuse this tech with the Navigator Exotic Trace Rifle. This grapple melee also counts as a melee or a grenade, meaning it works with Ashes to Assets or hands-on, but you get less super energy back than normal, and it works with firepower or heavy-handed, but not both at the same time in either case. It used to work with both, but now it is just one or the other, so use whichever you prefer. And when you land a grapple melee, it also unravels the target, and that's basically all you have to know about grapple grenade. Next is the shackle grenade. A thrown weapon of weighted strand matter that detonates on impact, suspending targets and creating additional suspending sub-projectiles. The compendium gives a bit more info, but basically you use it to suspend targets. You cannot suspend bosses however, but the grenade will snap in a way that deals a bit of damage to the boss. But yeah, this grenade is basically just used to suspend enemies. And lastly, we have the threadling grenade, a woven projectile that reweaves itself into threadlings while in flight. So this is just a grenade that sends out 3 threadlings. That's it. Very simple. Next we have the melees. Threaded Spike is the hunter melee, which is a rope dart that bounces between targets, damaging and severing them. The dart will return to you once it's done, returning melee energy for each target hit. Then you can press your melee ability as the dart gets close to you, and you can catch it to increase the amount of energy returned. The compendium gives us the values of how much melee energy is returned, based on how many enemies you hit and if you catch it or not. It also deals less damage every time it ricochets to another enemy, and I'm not sure how far it travels, but you can see in the gameplay footage it can't go forever. Next we have the Titan melee Frenzied Blade. This states activate your charged melee ability to dash forward, slashing at targets in front of you and severing them. So, like the grapple melee, this melee ability is extremely powerful with Banner of War and either Wormgod's Caress or Syntheseps, and it can hold up to 3 melee charges. And I'm not sure if you know this, but the melee charge cooldown reduces for each charge that you have. The values are on screen, but ideally you will always have 2 melees available, because then you will get your 3rd melee charge back super quickly. 50% more quickly in fact. So just something helpful to know. And the next melee, the Arcane Needle on Warlock, works the same way. But from 2 charges to 3, it actually gets the melee charge back 100% faster. So again, try and only use 1 melee if you can, so that you are always in that quicker cooldown zone. The melee itself reads, sling a woven needle that will embed in your target, unraveling them. Activate your melee ability again to chain up to 2 additional attacks. I tested this a lot, and I don't think that this melee has any range drop off. It seems to go forever. It will just be very hard to actually hit the enemy at a super long distance. So now we move on to the supers. Again, we'll start with the Hunter, which is Silk Strike. It states, weave a vicious rope dart and tear through your targets. Swing the rope dart in front of you to deal damage. The next part is not true. The tip of the dart no longer deals bonus damage. It used to, but they changed this in a patch a long time ago. But defeating them with the tip does cause targets to explode. And the heavy attack swings the rope dart in a singular motion to deal heavy damage all around you. And then your grenade is replaced by a grapple grenade that refreshes super quickly. So you can use this super to grapple around for far distances. So you can dodge in this super, you can grapple, you can even do your ensnaring slam if you have the aspect equipped. The compendium gives us additional info if we're interested. It lasts for almost 25 seconds at base, and the attacks will drain the super more quickly. So there is a skill gap to getting the most out of this super. In my opinion, it's the best ad clear super in the game right now. I just love it. It's very strong and it has really good movement for taking out lots of enemies, and it does high damage. Next we have the Titan Super Blade Fury. Create 2 woven blades and roam the battlefield. Perform a leaping slash towards nearby targets, severing them on hit and dealing bonus damage to suspended targets. Each successful hit briefly increases your attack speed and grants energy for your heavy attack. The heavy attack unleashes a heavy upward slash, creating 2 suspending projectiles that seek out targets. Again, the compendium gives us all the info we need. It deals 25% extra damage to suspended targets, and the attack speed can be increased up to 100%. So again, there is a skill gap to this super. Ideally, you want to lead off with a heavy attack to suspend enemies so that you deal more damage to them. There's a 1.75 second cooldown on your heavy attack, but you can reduce this by dealing damage with your light attacks, which deal more damage to suspended enemies and increase in speed if you chain them together. So what you want to do is do a heavy attack, then deal at least 3 light attacks to take out a group of enemies. And then you can do another heavy attack on the next group and take them out with light attacks. This is probably the most efficient way to use this super, at least in high-end content. In low-end content, however, you can just spam light attack because you do not need the damage bonus from the heavy attack suspending enemies. Another thing to note with this super is it gives you all 3 of your melee abilities back, which is extremely strong. So you can be doing 1-2 punch melees on like a boss or something, and then pop your super, go to town, and then when you come out of your super, you'll have 3 more melees to keep going to town on the boss. And finally, we have the Needlestorm super on Warlock. It states after embedding themselves in the environment, the needles will reweave into a host of threadlings. Threadlings you create will return to you and perch if they can't find nearby targets. Damaging targets with your weapons or melees will send out the perched threadlings to attack. So this is a high damage one-off super. It is great for single target damage to delete a high health target quickly, or it can be used for ad clear, and it's not bad there either. The compendium says it releases 7 to 9 homing projectiles, and in my testing it was 8. And they deal pretty good damage on their own. And when they explode, they release threadlings, which according to the compendium deal 41.5% increased damage. And in my testing, these threadlings don't get buffed by Thread of Evolution. But even still, as far as one-off supers go for boss damage, this is one of the best. And that is going to do it for the Strand abilities. This was a quick one because there are only 9 abilities total in the Strand kit. That being said, they are all incredibly strong in my opinion. I think Bungie did a great job with Strand, and it has been a real bright spot in the game since Lightfall came out. And lastly, we have Void. We will get Blink out of the way first. This is a jump that is unique to Arc Hunter and Void Warlock. It says, jump while airborne to teleport a short distance. So this works just like the Arc Hunter Blink, and it can be enhanced with the exotic Astrocyte verse. There is a slight cooldown after you blink twice, and it will take some getting used to if you are trying to traverse jumping puzzles with it. Now let's look at the melees. There are only 4. The Hunter has a snare bomb which states, throw a smoke bomb which attaches to surfaces and pings enemy radar. Weakens targets on detonation. The compendium lets us know that the weaken is for 8 seconds, which is really good. And it also pings the radar in PvP, so you can use it as a radar manipulation tactic to throw off other guardians. It also slows players and enemies, which can be very useful. And you can quickly throw a smoke and then a grenade to perform a wombo combo and get some easy kills in the Crucible. Next, we have the Titan melees. First is Shield Bash. After sprinting for a short time, use this melee ability to unleash a devastating Shield Bash that suppresses the target. Final blows with Shield Bash grant an overshield, so this is a pretty good melee. The suppression effect can take guardians out of their super in PvP and stun enemies in PvE. And you can also use it as a movement tool, but it will use up 15% of your melee energy. This is so that you can't spam it in PvP for constant quicker movement, and it deals decent damage as well. And next we have the Shield Throw. Hurl your Void Shield toward a target. The shield can ricochet off targets and surfaces, granting overshield for each target hit. It can ricochet up to 3 times and grant 15 HP to your overshield for every hit. This melee doesn't do much damage, but it is nice because it is a ranged melee option, which can be really good in higher end PvE a lot of the time. And the second chance exotic gauntlets can make your shield throws weaken targets and stun barrier champions for even more utility. And now we have the Pocket Singularity melee on Warlock. Launch an unstable ball of void energy that detonates when it nears a target, pushing them away from the blast and making them volatile. Sadly, I rarely save PvP clips, but this thing is great in PvP for shutting down shotgun rushers. It has a lot of utility there. In PvE, it's quite weak, but it does proc volatile, which is nice. So that is it for the melees. Now we'll check out the void grenades, starting with the Axiom Bolt. This is a bolt of void light that forks on impact into smaller bolts that seek out targets, so it just releases 2 tracking orbs. This grenade doesn't do much damage at all. They used to be really good in PvP, but they did get nerfed. Next is the Magnetic Grenade, a grenade that attaches to targets and explodes twice. This is a good single target damage grenade, but it's not good for ad clear. You can also run this with Chaos Accelerant to make it into a handheld supernova. Next is the Scatter Grenade, a grenade that splits into many submunitions and covers a large area with multiple explosions. This is really good in PvP, as it's pretty forgiving and deals high damage if the submunitions all hit a player. It can even one-shot guardians at max resilience, and it's pretty decent in PvE as well. Next is a Suppressor Grenade, an explosive grenade that suppresses, preventing targets from using abilities for a short time. So this is a utility grenade. It is not used for single target damage or ad clear, but rather to suppress enemies so that they cannot attack. It can also shut down supers in PvP, which is very effective, and shut down Lucent Hive supers as well. It's quite similar to a Blinding Grenade. It's great in high-end content because it disables dangerous enemies for 10 seconds. Next is the Void Spike, a grenade that attaches to any surface and emits a torrent of damaging void light. These aren't great for PvE because you kind of need walls to stick them to be effective, but they do deal good damage, and they are really nice in PvP as well for hitting enemies behind cover. The Void Wall is a grenade that creates a horizontal wall of burning void light. This grenade deals nice damage over time and used to hit really hard in PvE, but it got nerfed. But it's still a decent option for PvP and for PvE, so long as you're accurate with your grenades. And lastly, we have probably my favorite grenade, the Vortex Grenade. A grenade that creates a vortex that pulls targets inward and continually damages those trapped inside. These are awesome in PvE because they pull enemies towards them, so they are great for ad clear and single target damage. They are just really good, and they're decent in PvP as well. I've gone flawless a few times with Controverse Hold Warlock and these grenades. Now we move on to the supers, starting with Hunter and the Deadfall Shadow Shot, aka Single Shot Tether. Tether foes to a Void Anchor, weakening and suppressing them for you and your allies. The Void Anchors fired from the Shadow Shot pull targets towards the impact point, which then become traps and wait for prey. Void Anchors have increased range and last longer. So this super is incredibly effective in high-end content. It provides a 30% weaken on enemies, so it is great for boss DPS phases, and it's also amazing for group ad clear as it tethers them all, and as you deal damage to one target, they all take damage, allowing you to clear out huge swaths of enemies with just one tether. And as you get kills on enemies that are tethered, it extends the duration of the tether anchor point, which can last for over 30 seconds in total. I just love this super so much. I used to main Orpheus Rig Hunter way back in the day, just chaining tethers. If you use it in the right spots, there aren't many stronger supers in the game. Next is the Mobius Quiver Shadow Shot. This reads, tether foes to a void anchor, weakening and suppressing them for you and your allies. Fire 2 volleys of 3 void arrows that seek nearby targets. Shadow Shot makes targets volatile and deals increased damage to tethered targets. Defeating tethered targets creates orbs of power. So this one is the more high damage variant of Tether. It doesn't last as long, but the tether itself hits enemies much harder, and in addition to 30% weaken and suppressing them, it also makes them volatile. This super is also very good. Which one you want to use just depends on the combat encounter. And then that brings us to Spectral Blades. Summon a pair of Deadly Void Blades and stalk the battlefield in a Veil of Shadows. So this one has a light attack swipe and a heavy attack that makes you invis and also applies weaken. But the heavy attack uses lots of super energy. So ideally you would do one heavy attack to weaken an enemy and then swipe away with your light attacks. You can also spam Trapper's Ambush while in this super. That being said, the super is not really used in PvE ever. It is more of a PvP super. Tethers are just so much better in PvE in my opinion. Next we have the Titan supers, starting with Sentinel Shield. Summon a Shield of Void Light. Guard with Sentinel Shield to create a defensive wall. Allies who shoot through the wall have increased weapon damage, and guarding allies makes the shield last longer. So the compendium gives us some good info here. The more allies you are protecting with your shield, the slower the super drains. And your allies deal a whopping 40% increased damage and get better handling and reload speed. But to use this in a DPS setting means that you're missing out on one person's damage, but it's still very strong. With just one weapon surge of 10% plus the 40% it provides, you hit for 54% more damage. 3 surges would take this up to 70.8% more damage. It does not stack with Radiant or Lumina though. Don't worry, I tested a myriad of things to see what could potentially stack. This is just the Spark Notes version. Also, the Aspect Offensive Bulwark gives you an additional shield throw while in this super. So you don't just have to use the shield block with this super, it can be really effective offensively too with shield throws and bashing enemies, and it's especially good with the exotic gauntlets Doomfang Pauldrons. Next is Warden of Dawn, aka Bubble. Create an indestructible dome to protect you and your allies. Passing through Ward of Dawn grants you and your allies a temporary increase to weapon damage. So this is a 25% increase to weapon damage, just like Radiant. Therefore, it doesn't stack with Radiant, but it will stack with things like weapon surges and debuffs like weaken. The bubble itself lasts for 30 seconds, and it gives you 15 seconds of weapons of light every time you pass through it. It also gives you an overshield when you're inside it from Armor of Light. But when you step outside, you will not have the overshield unless the person that casts the bubble is running the exotic helmet, Helm of Saint 14. Also, when you cast this super, you get a grenade charge back. I tested this with Armamentarium to see if it would give 2 charges, but it is only 1. Still, it's very good to know. You could weaken a target with an Echo of Undermining grenade, then pop bubble, and then when the weaken wears off, you could reapply it with the refresh grenade charge. The strength of your bubble is tied to your resilience stat, but with how strong Rezel is, especially on Titan, you should always be running 100 resilience anyways. And we're also getting a new Void Titan super in the final shape, so I will try to cover that when the time comes. But for now, let's move on to the Warlock and look at the Cataclysm Nova Bomb. Hurl an explosive bolt of void light at a target, disintegrating those caught within its blast. Nova Bomb travels slowly and seeks targets. Detonations shatter into smaller seeker projectiles. So this Nova Bomb variant is often referred to as Slova Bomb, and it is the superior Nova Bomb in my opinion. Its seekers track to targets, so it's better for ad clear, but it also does better single target damage in most instances. Because unless a target is perfectly still when you hit it with the Vortex Nova, then it won't deal as much damage. The one downside to Cataclysm is sometimes enemy projectiles can hit the Nova Bomb and cause it to explode prematurely. Don't you hate when that happens? And speaking of Vortex Nova Bomb, it states, hurl an explosive bolt of void light at a target, disintegrating those caught within its blast. Nova Bomb creates a singularity that pulls targets inward and continually? Yeah, okay. Maybe continuously? I don't know. I'll be honest, some of Bungie's wording on these subclass descriptions is really weird to read. Or maybe I'm just losing it after my 20th video. Anyways, that pulls targets inward and continually damages those trapped inside. So to me, the only benefit of this Nova Bomb is that it travels faster, which can be beneficial in some instances. And it also can't be shot down by enemy fire. But the Slova Bomb tracks, so it is more forgiving than this one. With this one, if you miss, you're screwed. As for Nova Bombs as a whole, as someone who loves Void Warlock, I think they need a damage buff in the final shape. With the amount of power creep we've gotten, Nova Bombs have not kept up. The Needlestorm super on Strand Warlock hits much harder than it for a one-off damage super, so hopefully it gets buffed. And that brings us to the final super, Nova Warp. Step between dimensions to subvert the laws of physics. so you're actually able to teleport in your Nova Warp even if you're not running Blink. This super is great for traversal and covering ground quickly, and as an ad clear super, it's actually pretty good. It's really nice to have an ad clear option instead of just picking between two one-off supers in the Nova Bombs. You charge up your light attack and it applies volatile when it hits. This is actually a good super even though it doesn't see much play. That is because one-off supers are currently the kings in Destiny. Our subclass neutral game is so strong that we don't really need ad clear supers anymore. And that is going to do it for a breakdown of every ability in Destiny 2. If you found this helpful, then a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Hopefully it helps you to better understand Prismatic when it comes out in the final shape. Thanks for watching and take care.